Good morning. Good morning. Give me a hot second for some. I had to work on some technical difficulties. We welcome to World of Akibaland, understanding African spirituality. We welcome you to another segment of World of Akibaland, understanding African spirituality. I welcome you to the place. I tell you that the two most powerful words on the planet is the I am. I am. I am the seeker. I am the Malakio. I am the search of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. And as I find it, I share it to you. So I am that. I am. We take a academic approach to African spirituality because there are no videos to watch. There are no very few books, previous books that are written with a sympathetic eye, with the understanding that studying African spirituality is studying the ancient wisdom of our people to help us understand how we saw ourselves in God and how we were able to do the things in life that we were able to do. So if you came from watching African history, this is always a good thing because in this particular segment, we talk about the spiritual awareness that Africans had since the dawn of time. The spiritual awareness. They say that we lived in a spiritual or a religious universe. The Latin word the word religion comes from means to bind together, to connect. And they believed that everything was connected and bound together. And so we dig deep into the wisdoms of ancient Africa and other sects. We say that if there are 4,200 different tribes in Africa, there's 4,200 different ways to give God praise. No one way can define a creator. Ain't that something? No one way can define a creator. So they didn't look down upon each other in terms of or try to force their faith on anybody else. No. They just said, let us understand what you know if they come in contact. And we're gonna understand and I know. I'm not gonna force you. Why? Because we're a different tribe, clan, and people. And so we're gonna come together to give thanks to the creator. And so even nowadays when you're looking at African traditions, it's all about the balance, and that's the relationship God has with man has with man. It's the relationship man has with the land. It's the relationship man has with spirit, and it's the relationship where man has with God. And that's where we are. I know for me, when as I came up, my community, in which I'm a part of, said that we want to, if you're going to continue in the faith, as we started developing toward leadership, they said there are certain things that you need to read. And so it wasn't mandatory reading, it was suggested reading. And so this book was commonly suggested. I don't know what happened before. I'm in the church almost 30 years, and so it was 68 years old. And so what they did before me in terms of did they make it an official class, I don't know. I wasn't there. All I can say is this was the book that was suggested that we begin our. This is where we went to begin our understanding of African spirituality, and so this is where we begin. I begin teaching African spirituality. So if you would like to go purchase the book, I have no connections to it. I'm making no money from it, so I'm not advertising it. Do we have a bookstore? Yes. And if you can go to the bookstore, the Shrines bookstore, and pick the book up, it's a good read, especially as we go to class. There will be other books that I will grab and pull to discuss it, but I figured if we give our youth and ourselves an academic understanding of African spirituality, when we walk into studying into traditional forms of African spirituality, we walk with a state of knowing, a sense of understanding, a place to pull from. So you always got to look for the sympathetic ear, and in terms of African spirituality, where you're not saying, oh, this is primitive, this is voodoo, this is evil. No, this is the ground and the foundation of everything else, because we were the people who gave the world religion. Right. With that, I say, we're going to do a quick recap of what we have gone in. We have talked about, and this is important, because we're going to deal with this today. we've talked about monotheism, polytheism, and animism. Which animism is, monotheism is there's only one God. Polytheism is God, deities, spirits, ancestors, man. Four, God, deities, spirits, ancestors, man. It's a hierarchy of leadership in terms of responsibility or access to God. Woo! That's a whole different thing. Access to God. You have God Almighty, you have the deities, the smaller gods, you have the spirits in the world, then you have your ancestors, and then you have man. And we're gonna discuss that today. We want to open it up, but we want to make sure that you understand that monotheism is the one God, polytheism is multiple gods, and animism is multiple gods and smaller spirits and soul consciousness, right? And so we have those. Did all that come from African spirituality? Absolutely. There is nothing that I didn't just say. Christians did not say, "Oh, we're the ones who came up with monotheism." No, European Christians did not come up with the concept. The concept of Christianity is a manifestation of ancient African wisdom and spirituality. Yes, we have African religions that are way older than Christianity that are monotheistic. Just take a look at it. But then you also see areas of Christianity that blend into African spirituality, but they don't want to claim it. But it's the same thing. We'll learn that today. And then we discussed the four areas of African spirituality, which are the basic things that you'll have to connect with, which is the Muntu, which is intellectual beings. God, spirit, beings. Anything that has intellect is in the Muntu field of existence. Kintu, those are trees. Those things that have that the people in the Muntu has dominion over. Trees, fish, plant vegetation, rocks. That's the Kintu. I'm sorry. Yeah, your Kintu is individuals in the Muntu, which is intellectual beings, have dominion over the Kintu, right? And then you have Hantu, which is the time. It's important. Time is key when it comes to the Hantu or African spirituality. And we said time is broken up into two areas, which is the Sasa and the Zamani. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to dive a little bit more into how the spiritual realm works with the Sasa and the Zamani. We'll talk about that. And so we dealt with it last week, the Kintu, which is worship modality, the expression. And it didn't dive deep as I expected to, because again, with the Hefe, again, what happens in the Kuntu, which is the modality, there's not a lot of information out there on African spirituality. There's not something that they wrote. There's something that they wrote down. It was a way of life. It was a culture. It was an experience. So you don't have to write. You didn't have to have scripture. Why? Because it was just who you were. They understood that we lived in a state of a religious universe. Everything belongs to God. Everything is connected to God. Everything is a part of God, and that's important when looking at African spirituality. It's deeply, 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 deeply important. Everything is connected, and so no, there's not a lot of writings. And so that's why you look for information that has a sympathetic ear to understanding how sacred this wisdom is. And so as we went through we went through and that was, I just went through the first series of the book in that quick second. And then we got into deeper chapters that described the nature of God, right? And it's no different than anything else. Omnipresent, is all knowing, all seeing, and everywhere. No different than anything else. So it's not an isolated understanding that God is all things. And then we went into the discussion of God at work. God at work in all things, the things that God do, his providence, how he takes care of everything that he creates. Yep. the providence. He sustains it all. They said God has two bowls in one tribe. Said God has two bowls. He has a spiritual bowl and he has the physical bowl. Right? Those are both the worlds that he created, and he controls everything in each bowl. But they blend together in a lot of ways. The work of God. God works through man. You know what I mean? God gives vegetation. He brings rain. He does it all. God, the governing of God. Nothing escapes God's judgment. Yes. And then God's how he works through man. God will sit down and you can be influenced by God. This is ancient African wisdom. This is not, and when we look at the newness of Christianity and we measure it towards ancient African wisdom, we do in Christianity, we celebrate and practice ancient African practices and customs, not even knowing it, thinking that it's only Christianity. No, Christianity is the youngest development of ancient African wisdom. The next youngest one, along with Christianity, is Islam. They're the two young ones. Other than that, it's just a spiritual entity of tribes. And if you have 4,200 different tribes in Africa, you have 4,200 means of expressing God, because they express or experience God according to the life that they live on a regular basis. Some people deal with fish, and so yeah, you're going to pray God that he supplies more fish. Some people have cattle, so you're going to pray to God for the cattle. Some people have is vegetation, fertile lands. There's a lot of things that the work of God does, and so they attribute everything to God, even their own accomplishments. And so this is a religious universe. Only in this European or Eurocentric thinking do we begin to take credit for anything that happens in our lives. We get mad at everything. They said, I can't get mad at that. Why? Because it's God. And so now as we take a look, and then we also dealt with God and nature. And how everything is, there was nothing in nature that is separate or distant from God. And I know in the Bible they talk about, even the rocks will cry out. But you have to understand when you read that verse that African spirituality believe that rocks connect with God as well. And then if we're understanding science of the present day and we connect it to how advanced African spirituality is, right? Because it's not non-existent. Because we have a lot of people returning back to traditions because they're saying the newness of the methods are failing. And it's not the fact that Christianity and Islam is failing, it's the fact that European interpretation separate from African wisdom is failing. That's something different. So you have to be able to look at Christianity and Islam and everything else as though God is connected to everything and all things. We live in a religious universe. We went to the worship of God, and we talked about that, which is the sacrifices, the offerings, the songs, the prayers, the invocations, and certain individuals, the priests, the rainmen, the diviners, individuals who are blessed with the ability to talk with God. And there's a lot of reasons why they say that it takes those individuals, because they says man sometimes in certain cultures is not worthy to speak to God. They said God is so far removed from the experience, you need the intercedence. Wow. To speak to God on your behalf. Now, as we go deeper, we'll understand that, because we'll start dealing with the spiritual aspect of the African spirituality. And that's this, which is this chapter is dealing with the physical versus the spiritual and how they connect. The spiritual versus the physical and how they connect. And I don't know how my camera shrunk me down. I guess I didn't place it right. And so this is more, in this particular chapter, it's more dealing with the supernatural aspect of African spirituality. Yes. the supernatural aspect. Now, a lot of times when we're talking about African spirituality, we always say, and when we're discussing it, because is there a particular other than Christianity and my Christian faith being merged with African traditions, and because we say we can rewrite Christianity because it's ours, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're rewriting how we're moving out the European influence and bringing back more traditional impact. Now, is there an African sect that I follow? Absolutely, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. I take classes and everything from a diviner from who studied in the motherland. Absolutely, yes. But we won't talk about that. We're gonna talk about overarching, and when you make a decision to bring in African traditions in your way of life and your way of thinking, that you have a academic means of understanding it. And so this is why we're taking our time to go through book after book after book. So I'm not telling you something that has not been already researched. So if you get a chance and you want to take the time, this is a good place to start. This, and we'll deal as we go in and talk about the overarching issues, or philosophies and principles of African spirituality, dealing with different books. We will definitely take a look at more than just this book, and then we will also get a chance to take a look at direct influences in terms of different sects. So in this chapter, we're at chapter 7. Chapter 7 deals with the deities, spirits, and this last phrase is something that the writer just he defined it as the living dead. I said that, and when I read it, he said we're going to call this area of spirituality or existence of the supernatural the living dead, and we're going to explain to you why. Now, from my understanding after reading the book, as we go forward, I'll let you know ahead of time. He could have named it the ancestors. But you want to understand what that means, because after a while ancestors change into spirits. So there's two levels of spirits, and then versions of spirits, and then you have the living dead, which are ancestors who has recently transitioned over. And so let's get started. The first part where they discuss it is they dealing with the issue of African deities or smaller gods. So when you're dealing with polytheism, and so you're dealing with African traditions and cultures and tribes who believe that there is more than just, not only that there is one defining overarching God, but that God created smaller gods to carry out certain tasks on behalf of God. Now, these smaller gods are closer to God than man. Ain't that so? Closer to God than man. And it is also understood that they don't speak your language. There is a spiritual language. And these gods only speak in that spiritual language. They don't necessarily speak directly to man. Now, certain tribes will give homage to these deities. You'll have ritual ceremonies, like we talked about in the last chapter, where you have offerings and sacrifices, prayers, all of this to these deities or these smaller gods. And now, and know that there is that hierarchy: man, ancestors or living dead, spirits, deities, God. This is the highest in African spirituality before you get to the creator. And so when we talk about those deities, and in the book, it listed this as literally the largest group that has the largest amount of deities. Over, what was it? It's 1,007, over 1,700 deities is Europe. Now, this has become the most common, in one of the most common in modern society. right? And so everybody, there's not anybody that I don't know who is not related and connected to Yoruba. Some of the things that I'm researching and studying, I even add some of these images to stories, biblical stories, and because what does it look like to be able to see divine entities that look like you, right? Especially when it comes from your people, right? There's no poison. You can put up a I say you can put up a white Jesus, knowing that Christianity is African religion and it comes out of the heart. If you watch African history class and you see where they came up out of, the center of Africa, traveling up what? The Nile River to get to Egypt to cross over. Come on. There should be no images in our spiritual history that does not resemble us. And so their deities, when they give them form, they resemble us. Now, a lot of times in these African deities, and we will say, we talked about anthropomorphic understanding where man can't separate anything from his existence. He has to be able to explain things about life and wisdom according to his own understanding. And to be able to do that, he has to he gives those deities, spirits, attributes that reflect himself, right? And so that's important that you will see. I'm going to give my deities images that look like me. Now, one of the things when we start studying in African history class, right? Because I don't know if we'll get into Yoruba during African history class. We'll definitely get to the Yoruba faith and African spirituality class. But when we want to know again that this is a polytheistic, one of the polytheistic tribes, or sects of Africa that have multiple deities. Is there anything wrong with that? Absolutely not. Why? Because it becomes some ancient African wisdom. It's ours. And we know that if there's 4,200 tribes in Africa, there's 4,200 ways of expressing and experiencing God, right? For us, or as Christians, we got God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. So they broke God up into multiple deities. We break them up into two other deities other than the supreme God. It's still broken up, right? Look at it. Everything is and for them, everything is an extension of God. There's nothing, because we have a Eurocentric view, we can say deities and be like, oh, that's not, wait a minute. But in African spirituality, everything's God, even the rock. Everything is God. Everything has it. And then we know science, if you tune in to a Keebaland Inspirational Sunday, when I break it down to the atom, these things we can only give overarching reviews. During African Keebaland Inspirational Sunday, yeah, that's for the child and for the parent. I go detailed and how we found out, because science, we say, for us, science is God's language. Science and math is how God communicates to man. And so through science and mathematics, we've been able to see how God has created the world. And in every element of society, social life, and this is why they said God can exist in anything, there's an atom. And that atom moves. And it's that energy, the atom, they don't know where it comes from. They said that is the beginning and end, and it's everywhere, and it's a part of everything. God. So never take in African spirituality, there's nothing that God can't do. Even create smaller gods on behalf. Why? Because in African spirituality, it's so distant from man's experience that he needs to get us, for us to get closer to enlightenment. We need intercedence. Even Jesus said, pray in my name and I'll take it to the Father. I'm going to the Father. I'm interceding on your behalf. Why? Because you're so far from who you should be, where you can't speak to him directly. But I'm going to prepare a place for you. Ain't that something? Intercedence. We also have another coming out of African history class. We talked about the Mayat and the different deities inside Kemet spirituality, Kemetic spirituality. And so that was important. How did Egypt become vast in what they knew. But we also said Egypt was not a solo aspect of spirituality. It didn't have a lock on it. Egypt got some of their wisdom from Nubia, which is a community that is older than Egypt. Nubia or Kush, and we discussed that. Do I have the? Yep, I have the map. The Kushites, right here. The Nubians. They got. Oh, you can't see my cursor. I'm sorry. But the Kushites and Nubia. Kushites is the big white one, and Kemet, which is Egypt, is the smaller brown one. Yes, Kushites have more of a religious influence, and we understood then that. I'm knocking on my door. Give me a hot second. I have never had anybody knock on my door during class, and I apologize. It'll never happen again. All right, so Nubia had a more of just as strong an influence in spirituality as anything else, and so these deities. Let's get back here. Could be in any situations or circumstances where man can't reach the creator, but you can reach the deity. And they could have been phenomena of nature, deities such as water, sun. In certain aspects, the earth is a deity, feminine deity created by God. The sun is a deity. Water is a deity. So there are different deities. It could be spiritual entity or a phenomena of nature, right? Now, the next level of in the spiritual, the supernatural hierarchy are spirits. Now, again, very few material is written on the understanding of the spiritual realm. It's not. It's just very few. So they are in the book. When you look at this particular conversation or the book in this chapter is really written mostly by stories. He breaks down what he was able to understand via the stories that he was able to gather by the different various tribes, multiple tribes that he came across. And so very few. And now, but however, the commonality that was understood in terms of African understanding, African spirituality, is that spirits are above man, but below the deities and below God. So above man, but below God. And now, humans, man, it's a spiritual evolution, a social evolution, a dynamic to be ready and prepared to transition from the physical to the spiritual. When we see death, we take death hard. That didn't happen back in ancient African spirituality. It wasn't as, even though they felt the pain that they, the loss, but it was a more of a natural transition in life, and that every man seeks to transition from the physical to the spiritual. It was the hope of transition. Now, how long you get to exist in your sasa, your zamani, we'll talk. So in the spirit realm, you'll have those two types of spirits. You have those spirits who are have never been in human form, entities, powers. And you know how we talk about that certain entities are spirits, right? And spirit of fear, spirit of depression. These are spirits, and these spirits have the ability to possess spirits. And for Africans, it's exactly the same thing. African spirituality is exactly the same thing. They have the understanding that there are certain spirits now, and those are the ones that don't take human form but come. Now, there's another form of spirit, and it's broken in two halves. There's another form of spirit where, I had all these pictures set up and I didn't even use them, but we're going to use them now. So when we talk about, we'll use it in this time. Another form of spirit is the spirit of an ancestor, right? Now, not necessarily, now, ancestors are what is called the living dead. However, there is the time frame of the Zamani. Now, the Zamani, they will say a spirit or someone in your bloodline becomes a spirit when their name is no longer remembered. They vanish into the spiritual realm, vanish into the spiritual realm when no one on earth knows them anymore. Wow, right? They vanish into the spiritual realm when it gets past 5 generations. Those things are, that's when individuals in your life, they said they become sunken into the depth of the Zamani. Now, do you remember what the Zamani is? Zamani is the history of a people or you. Your past is your Zamani. We said there are two important key time frames in African spirituality, and that's your Sasa, which is your now. Christianity will have people thinking about their future and the hereafter, and no, because when you do that, you don't focus on what you're doing today. And God is more important. Not he cares more about not where you're trying to get to. I'm trying to get to heaven. No, God is more important of what you're doing this second. That's the Sasa. He's more focused on what are you doing at the moment of your Sasa. And then when you're dealing with spirits, when you say in 5 generations, the Zamani is your past. How long they said, and that's why we said last week when we talked about the elders in a community who are more revered because of the length of the Sasa. No, the length of, the Sasa is longer and the Zamani is longer than yours. So that they have more time in this side in God. Now, when you become a spirit, that's your great, 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 great grandfather. Now, you might only see a picture of him. You might know his name. You don't know him. And after 5 generations, and then for us black people dealing in slavery, there might be, we probably only, with some of us, you got 3 generations and you don't know nobody. You know the names and the pictures, but you don't remember them. And in that form or scenario is when they fade into the spirit. When a person, so when a person transitions over, they may be in the spiritual realm, but they're not considered a spirit, which is beyond human form, shape, personality, name. And they exist there. And there is lineage tied to your lineage, but they're more spirit than they are human, because there's nobody that can tie them to a human form that still lives. Now you have these individuals who are 105 years old that still remembers a whole lot of people. And so the longer a person lives, the longer a person can exist in that ancestral realm from the memory of the old person. As long as there's somebody that exists, then that person can exist in the ancestral realm before they transition into the spirit. Now, can spirits be used? Yes, spirits, spirits, even them, and then Africans are never afraid of possession of spirits. They said they see it all the time. It's common for them. Ain't that something? They said in the artistry of song and dance, a person can dance into a fever where they become possessed by a spirit. Does that sound familiar? When you singing and something comes over you and that spirit just hits you, does that sound familiar? Again, Christianity and the Nation of Islam, or Islam, not just the Nation of Islam, but Islam, is just a manifestation of ancient African wisdom. And so they see it all the time. And sometimes spirits can be good, they can be bad, but most of the time they're just neutral. And one of the things that we in African spirituality, I keep saying we, so I say we because this is talking about us. This is, and the reasons why Africans never fear spirit is because they clearly know that there are men who walk this earth who, we have dominion over them. We can cast them out. Clearly. Now, do we use our spiritual powers that way? Are we that spiritually in tune or that spiritually focused? Where we are focused knowing that we have dominion over spirit? And sometimes if you're not in tuned to the spirit, you have those spirit specialists, you know, and those are the diviners, the rainmen, shoutmen. You know, you have those who specialize, trained, connect, gifted, or charged by God to be able to communicate with spirit. It's African spirituality. And realize that that's nothing separate. So when you start looking at African spirituality and it's being broken down to you, you start realizing, wait a minute, it sounds like the faith I already have. But the faith I got is indoctrinated with European philosophies. Push the European out, you get more back to African spirituality. That's the goal of the Pan African Orthodox Christian Church, I could say, right? And so we take a look at that diviner or men who go before you, to talk with or mediate or control, spirit. And so that's important. A lot of times when you say where does for African tribes, this is why certain lands are holy, certain locations are holy, because they said this is where the spirit resides. You have sacred mountains, you have sacred villages. Well, mountains, you have valleys, lakes. Spirits can reside in water, and around the community. Around the community, I know a lot of us, and we'll get into this when we go into the next level of, again, two spirits. Those who were human at one time, but are 5 generations deep, where they're released of their names and human characteristics, and they are just energy because it doesn't dissipate. Of course, aligned, and if I begin to talk about the spiritual African spiritual faith that I follow, still aligned with your bloodline, you can contact all of them. There are rituals where you can reach out and speak to all of them. Now, of course, you call those ancestors here. You call those ancestors that you know. Those ones, and that's the living dead. The ones that you know, their personality, character, name, what they look like, everything. You can call them and ask them to go get the more powerful spirits of your bloodline. And that's what we're in the practice of doing, right now, in terms of calling those deeper spirits of our bloodline. And so these are practices. We get homework and everything. And again, this is not something that's written. For us, it's a community that sits. We have a shaman who's been taught by another shaman, who's been taught by another shaman, who's been taught by another shaman, of the sacred traditions and processes of African spirituality. And so they're not afraid of spirits. Why? Because we have dominion over them. They're here too. Now, some of them may cross over. You might have old relatives that cross over with beefs and grievances. We get scared, because they might have revenge. And I would say no. When they cross over, they cross over. They can have malicious intent, yes. They can have good intent, yes. Or they can be neutralized. The key part of that is to know that you have dominion, or there are individuals who have dominion in that realm and can cast them out. Prayers, rituals, sacrifices, offerings, all that happens. And in the same way you can give offerings to God, they give prayer, rituals, offerings, incense to the deities. They give prayer, rituals, offerings to the spirits who were never human form, and then they give prayer, rituals, and offerings to the spirits of their bloodline who have been far removed from human experience. Again, this is what man seeks and man can't escape. Man will be spirit one of these days. They said some men even elevate to the level of deity. And if I could think of one, I'll say Marcus Garvey. There's nobody in the world that doesn't know this man. and he's affected everybody's life. And he promised that, he even spoke as an intercedent. If you need me on I'll come for you. I'm bringing thousands and thousands of African warriors who believe in the liberation of black people to be by your side. They said they become statesmen, saints in African spirituality. Now, of course, that's more recent, 1920s. But I couldn't tell you, I guess Patrice Lumumba, Stephen Biko, you know, individuals who have really done tons of work or for the continent, who could be deities, who are known globally for the development of our self-awareness. Yes. So you can elevate, and every man's goal. And when I say man, it's not male. When I say man, I mean humankind. It is the effort of man to become spirit, to be socially elevated to a high level of spirituality. In certain aspects of African spirituality, they say the more you're able to accomplish, the more you have influence and power in the spiritual realm when you transition over. So those wisest of us, and this is why you see shaman with the skulls of their ancestors, because they're channeling that wisdom and they're calling that power of that individual. And so it is up to us to become more inclined to be spiritual more than we are physical beings, but to enjoy both worlds. And now we move to that which they call the living dead, or as I call them and we all call them, those recent ancestors. Those recent ancestors who have transitioned to the spirit world, right? But there are people here who remember them. And so they will exist in that accessible realm for 5 generations. Because it's going to take 5 generations to move your recent ancestors into the Zamani, the depths of the Zamani, where they remove their names. The names, Big Mama. And all you have is a picture, and the kid says, "Who's that?" Now, after that kid says, "Who's that?" and somebody passes on, the only reason why the person remembers the person on the wall is because someone told them who it was. Now, they become spiritual, a deeper spirit that's still aligned with your bloodline. But somebody physically doesn't know who they are. And so these are the individuals where people are still living and they just transitioned over, and you physically know who they are. And they said, this is why, again, you got man, then you have your ancestors, then you have your spiritual ancestors, then you have whatever deities are there, then you have God in African spirituality. That's the hierarchy. And that's if you in polytheism, right? Animism. Okay? Monotheism, if I pass away and it's just you and God, then what happens? What happens to spirit? What happens to the energy of the energy of the spirit that sits? So there's no way that you can communicate with your ancestors? Nah, that's European. And I said they did that for a reason, because they understood the power of who you are when you connect to something that is willing to put work in on your behalf. Wow. Now, recently, in the area of education for entertainment, there have been 2 movies that come out for kids and adults. I watch these movies religiously, and this is going to be one of my favorites that I tell you about. They've tackled the concept of ancestors, spirituality, the Zumani, and that realm of existence there. And those 2 movies, if you haven't seen them, I don't know if y'all watched Soul last Christmas. I did. Right? And Coco. Now, Soul, I love Soul, but Coco, my favorite. Coco, the way they tackled and addressed the issues to help and this is in Mexican culture. Mexican culture is a derivative of African spirituality, because we taught everybody. Ain't nothing different about it. There's nothing different about it. And if when you look at these movies, of course you see in the soul, you see that spiritual realm. There is God, and then there's those deities or those spirits that are in conjunction, being told by God to do certain things. Woo! What is that? Deities, right? So when you look at it, you see the people in charge, the spirits that are in charge, who are sent to prepare other spirits to enter into the physical realm. Man, they were slowly educating kids in the ways of deeper spirituality and allowing them to understand the power of who we are. Now that was the only thing it didn't tackle. The more you have access to this spiritual understanding, the more you understand the power of who we are as African people. We're not working. You'll realize that you're never alone. You never have to have a bad day. You can have a rough day, but you understand that God did that. God, something, the negative energies, or got permission from God, because He's trying to teach you something, have you go through something, develop something. And if you have too much calamity, African spirituality said, a family tells them that, you know what, we're not in harmony with God. So we have to get back into the harmony with God. And what we're talking about is how the spiritual realm and the physical realm coincide in African spirituality. And we realize that we practice African spirituality more and more without even knowing it. Without even knowing it. And then when you have Coco, this brother walks into the spiritual realm. Wait a minute, how powerful is that? I sat down and said, man, for him to have that discussion with his family, that I entered into the spiritual realm and had to seek my ancestor because I wanted to get permission to play the guitar. Because one ancestor said, no, you can't play, and it went on. And so they would never play, but music was in their life. And so as he ventured into the realm of the ancestors, you see the man next to him trying to get, look, can you please get this to my family? Can you get them a picture of me? Can you get them my name? Because there's still generations there that remember me. And if I am not remembered, I will vanish into the Zamani. Right? So I'm no longer directly accessible to the people who need me. And I want to be remembered until there's no one else there to remember me. I wanted my picture hung up. I want a candle lit. Why? Because you can always call on me and I can respond. I can be an intercedent on your behalf. Now, it says that when a person transitions over, right? When a person, let me get to, because I don't want to keep y'all watching this cartoon. When a person transitions over to the ancestral realm, the language, the spiritual language becomes now known to them. Being able to speak, because it's like you in the spiritual realm, you don't speak English, you don't speak Spanish. No, they said it's a spiritual language. So they become, in African spirituality, it's stated they become bilingual. Being able to speak the language of spiritual language, and being able to speak the language of whatever family that they're connected to. They become bilingual. And so they become guardians also of tradition, heritage, rituals, rites, all of it. So if you're doing something wrong, they're gonna punish you. Not necessarily God. They will come get you. If you're doing something wrong, if things ain't going right. But they are it said that they our closest link to God. Your ancestors that crossed over are our closest link to God according to African spirituality. So when you sit down and you ever feel somebody in the room. Mama came to see me. I had a dream, or had a vision, or had a thought, saw a shadow, smelt the perfume. It's your ancestors. It's that memory. They're here. They're saying, "Hey, I need you to." Some people ask you. They may want things done. They become, again, guardians of us, protectors of us. But then there's a way to have ritual, ceremony, offerings where you're asking that they take this. Hey, can you get this to the Creator? Because there's a distance between our physical self and the spiritual self that exists in us to communicate with the Creator. Ain't that something? Now they say, of course, there are special individuals who can help you, speak with God. That's spirit specialists. Now there are training tools and rituals and things, rites of passages in African culture that you can create, that you can go through so that you can become a spirit specialist. Some of us are. Some of us are not. Right? But there are still things, ways that you can, if you can't reach God, you can always reach your ancestors. And that's the connection. That's the real now. And then let's get it. Some of us don't want, a lot of us talk about our ancestors and memories, and of a lot of people, even in African spirituality, it's not a love relationship. So when you have people paying homage and memory, and let's remember mama, can we give silence, and you're paying homage, that's one thing. Asking them to stick around, nobody's asking for that. You know what it's like to always hear footsteps through your house? Have you ever felt footsteps through your house? I have, on a regular basis. I do. And then for me, this is for me. This is off the book. For me, I tell my ancestors, this house is open. It's an open door for you. I always want to hear from you. I always want to feel you. I want to be educated by you. I want to be influenced. I want to make sure I'm walking the right steps. All right. When we pray, it's not like I pray to my ancestors. I ask my ancestors to come in, sit in the room with me. It's real talk. Can we pray to God together? Because if you're my antecedent, I'm not going to give you a prayer. How about this? Let's sit in the room and I meditate, and I sit in the room until I can say everybody's name or remember every thought. And I ask them, let's share a prayer together, and let's pray to God as a family to help bring my family together and the things that are happening around this world together. That I do. Everybody will be an ancestor someday. The quality of ancestor, that's up to you and what you do in your sasa. That's up to you what you do now. And so it is important always. The relationships you share with your family tree is sacred. This is why they wanted to sever our names when we got over here, because our names connect us to our God, our culture, our meaning, everything. And this is why we get back to our names, our culture, our meaning, and everything, because our roots run deep. Run deep. Imagine what type of help you would have if you had the ability, fortitude, and faith, or the knowing. Because in African spirituality, they don't talk about faith. It's a knowing. I know I have access to my ancestors. My ancestors have access to me. I know that if I call on them, they will do things on my behalf. I know that if I'm not worthy to speak to God, think about it, because most of us aren't. Now, they can speak to God on my behalf. Now, in Christianity, we do it with one person. But if you remember, Jesus, he was talking to Moses and Elijah. He didn't go straight to God that day. Look it up. I don't know the scripture by heart. I'll get it by next week when we come back live. But ancestors have, it's the power of who we are, man. And if we're talking about changing our lives and changing what we're going through, the best way to do that is to understand how much our physical state connects with the spiritual state, and how much our spiritual state influences the physical. This is chapter 7. This is understanding African spirituality. And the more you understand who we are as a people, you understand how we were able to create such wonderful communities and civilizations and influence the planet. And we still influence the planet with our spirituality. Go ahead and take a look at those two cartoons. They'll make you smile. Definitely give you an insight of how Africans saw the world and see the world still. With that note, hopefully you've been enlightened to embrace who God called you to be in the spirit. Next, I should see you Sunday at noon during a Keeble and Inspirational Sunday. One love.